It's October 25th. As you see there, I'm sorry, the email that I sent out said March 25th. I don't know what kind of a brain fart that I had with that. Those of you who are watching on YouTube, ring the bell, click the likes, and do what you need to do so you get notices from us about new uploads, which we're doing just about every week. Many of them are very brief, but hey, brief is better than long if you can pack the same amount of information in there. So this is the North Texas Church of Freethought, and we're going to talk a little bit about religious questions. You'll see as I go along. I wasn't sure quite how to title it. But here's the lay of the land when it comes to religion and churches. For most Americans, religion is about supernaturalism. And the big bad of religious supernaturalism, the ultimate source and cause and point and purpose of it all, of course, is God, who sits at the center of this web of heaven and hell, souls, angels, and demons, praying to get what you want, and so on and so on. As we are atheists, of course, we disagree. However, I think all of us would have to admit that this is an improvement, because it's encouraging to come to this in the early 21st century that believers must struggle to argue for, let alone prove the existence of their God on which all their other absurd ideas depend. Can you imagine anyone debating the existence of God 1,000 years ago? No, much more recently than that, the disputes were about such things as predestination, the name of grace and redemption, and the authority of Pope. Did you know that the chapters and verses of the Bible were added long after those writings themselves? And it is thought, in part, they added those chapters and verses to make it easier to reference when they had debates. And guess who they debated in the Middle Ages? Why, of course, they debated the Jews. In fact, they forced the Jews to debate them on whether Jesus was the Messiah. But modern apologists know better than to quote the Bible to prove the Bible, unless they can do so without appearing to do so, which they do try. And I'll ask those on to mute microphones so we don't have too much extraneous sounds. But the larger problem with all of this is that it's playing the Godist game. It keeps the focus on their claims, their beliefs. And as long as it is so, it prevents considering what religion really is, or rather what it does and what it should be trying to do. One way to look at it is that religion is or should be about trying to answer religious questions. Just science is about trying to answer scientific questions. So here are a few religious questions. Questions can be answered in different ways. I think you'll immediately see as you look down there. One way that you can answer these questions is, quote unquote, scientifically. That is, just take the first one, for example. We're here because of the Big Bang, because of nucleosynthesis in stars, of the elements of which our bodies are composed, and we've talked about that in the past. We're here because of the way that these elements interact with each other to form complex molecules and biological structure that then evolve over billions of years, and so on and so on. But that can't be the whole story, because if it is saying that we are nothing but our protoplasm. Isn't it odd, in fact, that we are the ones who tend to say, no, we're not just our protoplasm, and it's the radical weirdos who are against reproductive rights who want to say that a human being is a fertilized egg, and that, in fact, we are our protoplasm. Well, despite the difficulties of arriving at a scientific materialistic understanding of how to answer this first question, which we've really only understood even in outline in the last 100 years, it's an even more difficult challenge to figure out why we, in this of our minds, are feeling the totality of our experiences. And this is where we really becomes I, because there really is no we. It's just an offhand or vernacular to refer to us collectively, but there really is no collective mind of where each one of us came from and why. Again, we can speculate in general about our genetics and our upbringing and so forth, but this doesn't really answer the question still, does it? We humans are so very good at asking difficult questions, and some of us become very frustrated that the tentative answers we can think of are never certain, never final, and may even be possible to answer. The answers we seek may, indeed they always do, change over time. The answers, whatever form they may take, certainly differ from person to person, which is expected since we all have different experiences. And yet, so long as we live, we go on having experiences, and so we are capable of continually coming up with new and hopefully better answers to the question of who and what and why we are. The only thing certain is that we will go on wondering and questioning, and that's a good thing, and not, as so many assume, a bad thing. It's good to doubt. It's good to question. And that is only the first of these questions, which are only a few of more that we could add. How you answer such questions, even how you think of them, that's your religion. Not believing in God or supernaturalism generally does not mean that you have no religion. Maybe you don't have a religion because you never ask or even think about any of these religious questions. Rejecting religious supernaturalism doesn't mean that you, quote, have no religion, unquote. This is entirely in keeping with William James, the famous American philosopher, leader of the 19th century. He's the author of the book, Varieties of Religious Experience, classic work. And he defined religion, or described it as, one's total reaction upon life. But of course, if that's the case, if religion is really about making sense of your own internal, private, subjective experience, then really we, each of us, is, as Thomas Jefferson said of himself, a sect of one. Or as Thomas Paine did, he said, my own mind is my own church. And as the great scholar of comparative religions, Wilfred Cantwell Smith, put it, the study of a religion is the study of persons. Smith, who was a director of Harvard's Center for the Study of World Religions from 1978 to 1984, explained what he meant by this. Many Christians and many Muslims have come to believe that there is one true Christianity and one true Islam. Hindus, on the other hand, have gloried in diversity. One of the basic and persistent affirmations has been that there are as many aspects of the truth as there are persons to perceive it. Who was director of Harvard Center, as I said, more generally put it this way. It is to misunderstand man, not to recognize that the knowledge of a person available to another person, and that's what we're talking about here, not science, knowledge of the world as we all can put our heads together, because you cannot put your heads together to understand what's going on in each of our minds. Now that depends quite basically on the personal relationship between people. I cannot know my neighbor more than superficially, unless I love him. Well, this is how the NTCOF understands religion and its purpose. This is how we seek to reinvent religion. A lot of pieces are scattered about from all of the sciences from which it can be built, as well as elements of philosophy and even the wreckage of a variety of supernatural religious traditions. There's plenty of liberal theologians that have valuable things to say for freethinkers. Some of the extant religions, as I said, primarily Christianity, I'm not sure if there's any really super liberal Muslims. They've been trying to set themselves on new foundations by transforming the supernaturalism into analogies and symbolism. And like I've talked before about Bishop John Shelby Spong in the Episcopal Church, who takes that approach. But it's obvious that the task of creating rational religion has a long way to go. And this is not something to be disappointed about. Why should you want everything just handed to you on a platter? It's something to be gratified and optimistic about, that we have the freedom to choose the kinds of things based on, just like we choose our belief about science. You don't really choose your beliefs. You're forced into them by the fact and your reasoning process. Religion that can change and grow through a process of trial and error, just as we do as we go through life, is what humanity has needed for a long time. That's the kind of religion we need, and that's the kind of religion that we are trying to exemplify. So, I said last time, and we put up some quotes this time. Of course, quotes are always fun. They're not authoritative the way people quote the Bible, but Elva was the only one here who sent me their favorite quotes. She didn't indicate any particular one, but I'd like to have a future service where I just put up some favorite quotes and let you all take it away, or if you'd rather that I riff on them, there's most interesting quotes are the ones that you could expand into a whole book and discuss at length. So keep that in mind. Some other things that happened on October 20th today. First of all, in 1854, that was the Battle of Balaclava in the Crimean War. The famous Tennyson poem, The Charge of the Light Brigade. That's the one where theirs is not to question why, but theirs is but to do or die. That happened on this date in 1854. In 1944, Himmler orders crackdown on the Edelweiss Pirates. Now, if you're like me, you have no idea who the Edelweiss Pirates are. I know now because I looked it up. This was a youth group that kind of split off or was formed in opposition to the Hitler Youth. And these were young people, and of course, they couldn't go and march in the streets much, but they engaged in acts of sabotage, and they provided shelter and support for deserters of the Third Reich's army. There was another outfit, mainly academic, called the White Rose.
It looks like Tim just disconnected. We may have to wait a little bit to see if he can make it back in.
I see his mouse moving around. His video stopped now.
I think I heard a sound that sounded like a USB device disconnecting just before he dropped out. So
I heard that too, John. I was scrolling down to see who disconnected or who left. And then I
all
didn't
right,
know it was Tim.
Where
Oh, here he is.
Here I am back, something with the connection. Where did it cut out?
White Rose.
White Rose, right.
All right, so I was talking about in 1944, on this date, Himmler had ordered a crackdown on the Edelweiss Pirates, and that this was a youth group that had split off from the Hitler Youth. And a related group, not related really, but also another resistance group was White Rose, and these were academics who created leaflets and would go and put them into telephone books and otherwise distribute them and try to spread questioning and discontent, especially after the Battle of Stalingrad, which was a terrible loss of life, to try to get Germans to see that they were being led wrongly. Then on this date, October 25th in 1962, that was during the Cuban Missile Crisis, that Adlai Stevenson showed the UN Security Council reconnaissance photo of the Soviet missiles that had been installed in Cuba.
Remember it well.
And then in 1983, this was the date that U.S. and Caribbean allies invaded Grenada after a military coup there. Some of you may remember that. One of the least bloody wars. Just marched in and put things right, as it were. Some years later, I actually visited Grenada, and the people there, they thought it was a great thing that we came in and reversed their military coup. Who knows what would have happened had we not done that.
Yeah.
So, just to review our principles as our church, no doctrines and dogmas, but we do very much prize reason. We want to reason, and we want to enjoy life in each other, and we want to appreciate. And this is one of the things we can help each other with, is to appreciate what we have. And most of all, of course, love. Believers say God is love. It's kind of hard to understand that, but certainly humans can love. And we know why we love too, because we're social animals. It's hard to understand why a pre-existing, constantly existing being would have to love, because it's a function of our biology. So nice that we're human, not wandering albatross and other animals that really don't have to interact with other members of the species, except maybe for reproduction at times. So I just want to iterate some rules about political subjects. I put the rules in quote because they're just obviously things to think about. We're very concerned, most of us, with public policy, especially state-church separation and civil liberties, reproductive rights, and things like that. I think we should realize that many times facts are in dispute, and most of us get our facts from the media and not firsthand, so we have to keep that in mind. And we have to keep in mind that we should always respect others and not be antagonistic. You know, I came across a very interesting quote. There's a guy named Jonathan Haidt, H-A-I-D-T, who wrote this wonderful book called The Righteous Mind. And this is a quote from Mr. Haidt. He's got videos on YouTube that are well worth watching. There's one that is about an hour in length where he really goes through and puts up a lot of graphs that show how it is that things have become so divided now. But this is from his book, The Righteous Mind. If you really want to change someone's mind on a moral or political matter, you'll need to see things from that person's angle as well as your own. And if you do truly see it the other person's way, deeply and intuitively, you might even find your own mind opening in response. Empathy is the antidote to righteousness, although it's very difficult to empathize across a moral divide. Now, there's a lot there, so I guess I'm going to just go read his book to give you that information. But I think we should always realize, I think we do realize, especially when we've been meeting in person, that it's more important to understand than to persuade others to our point of view. We all hate proselytizing when it comes to other people's religions trying to get us to believe that their God is going to damn us to hell, we better believe their way, and so on. But to understand others, that's really the key, and that's the grease that keeps our society going. Let's just parse this a little again, just to emphasize that we need to see things from the other person's angle. It doesn't mean we need to come to their angle, because we need to maintain our own sense of who we are and what we are as well, but to try to appreciate where they're coming from. It's not hard to do, but it certainly does take an effort. And if you do truly succeed in doing that, really, as he says, deeply and intuitively, to get a grasp of how the mind works, you might even find your own mind opening. It's used for each one of us to expand and get a point of view from somebody else, to understand. Understanding helps both sides. And finally, he acknowledges it's very difficult to empathize, especially across a moral divide. How can you empathize with a Nazi? How can you empathize with some white supremacist who wants to assert just because someone is of a darker skin color that they're not a real human being or that they're somehow subhuman? These are very difficult things to do. We had in the past brought up this book by the former Westboro Baptist Church woman who came away from that church and described later that the reason that she was able to do so was that she was showing empathy and understanding by others instead of just constantly being told she was terrible and not even worth engaging. So whenever we can find a way to do this, I think it's important, and that's what we should strive to do. Remember, it's not just political matters, but moral core issue, the very things we care the most about. And just some housekeeping things here. I probably should spend a lot more time talking about this, but I haven't had to too much because of your generosity. Thank you so much for those of you who've been contributing. Freethought is not free. Please go to our website. Sign up for our newsletter if you're not already. At the bottom of every page, you in your email address is sign up. And then click the PayPal button and give us something, something you can spare. I'm not telling you like the believers do, you have to give until it hurts, but that'll be fine too. We won't object. The reasons to help support us, even up today, that's supporting us, because we can do together what none of us can do on our own. That's what it means to be social animals as we are. It takes an effort, but it's worth the effort, because we do wish to put your values, and we all wish to be the future that we wish to see. It doesn't do any good to curse the darkness unless we're willing to light the candle, to light the darkness.